It's time for the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. The podcast you look forward to for all of your news and reviews of the best comic books hitting stands. Whether it's DC,
Batman, Wonder Woman,
Marvel,
Spider-Man,
Image,
Spawn, Saga,
Boom,
Once and Future, Power Rangers,
or whatever book or publisher you follow.
we cover them all here.
This is the place for you.
That's right, it's for everyone.
This is the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast.
Let's get it.
Hello, folks, and welcome to another episode of the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. I am your host, Theo. Have another special episode lined up for you. I said it was going to be a quick turnaround, and it is. This episode, I'm going to be sitting down with the creative team of Scarlett from Skybound Image. Issue number 1 came out this past Wednesday, and Kelly Thompson and Marco Ferrari were on a whirlwind tour, and I'm happy to say that they took the time to stop over and talk to me about what's going on with Scarlett and what we can expect from the miniseries from Skybound. So it was a good time. Marco was a trooper. We started this interview a little bit after 3:30 Central Time, and he was actually calling in from Italy, and I know it was pretty late there, but he was a trooper, and we had a good time. So with that being said, if you have not read Scarlett number 1 yet, you can continue listening. We don't spoil too much in this conversation, maybe a little bit, but not enough to ruin the issue for you. But if not, you can pause right here and go and take a read and then come on back and listen in. But again, we don't spoil too much in our conversation. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and let you all listen to my conversation with Kelly Thompson and Marco Ferrari. And then when we get back, we're going to do some comic book reviews, including a more in-depth review of Scarlett number 1. So with that being said, here's my conversation with Kelly Thompson and Marco Ferrari talking about Scarlett. Hey folks, this is Theo. I am sitting here with Kelly Thompson and Marco Ferrari, the creators of Scarlett over at Skybound Image and the Energon Universe. We have our latest addition to that growing universe. Hey folks, welcome to the program. How are you?
Hi. Good. Thanks so much for having us, Theo.
I am very excited. You know, I have been a fan of the Energon Universe since it started with Void Rivals, and once G.I. Joe really started kicking off, I've been of even more interest. And, you know, I had the opportunity to talk to Josh about Duke and Cobra Commander, and so now I got you guys on to talk about Scarlett. So I am just overly excited to speak with you again. Thanks for joining the show. So I guess the first question is, how were you guys approached about taking on this project?
I think for me, they just came to me and asked me if I wanted to do it. I think, you know, my reputation for writing sort of tough action focused female leads, and some of them even being redheads, probably preceded me in getting that call, which is good. That's why you write badass redheads, so that you get to write more of them. So yeah, I was very lucky to sort of be in the right place in the right time, and I had the right sort of gap in my schedule, and I had never worked for Skybound before. And also I had worked very successfully with Hasbro. My very first published work in comics was Gem and the Holograms, which is Hasbro and IDW. So
So cool.
It is cool, and I'm not going to say anything because I'll be telling my age with knowing of growing up and quickly changing the channel whenever that crazy song came on the TV. So growing as a child of the 80s and early 90s.
That Gem song is amazing. That Gem song is a great intro song.
And now it's going to be in my head the rest of the day.
I would say it's almost as iconic as the G.I. Joe one. Not quite, but close. And it has 2 versions, and both versions are good of the Gem song, the Gem intro song. It's fascinating.
I will take your word for it. Because I'm telling you, it's in my head right now because she's truly outrageous and truly, see, it's going to be.
You really did go there. Man, that's really in your head, or you've just got a knack for that. It's hard for me to hear that stuff. I mean, I can get stuck with an earworm easily, but I can't really hear it without hearing it. So it's definitely not a skill I've got.
So let me ask you, what about you, Marco? How'd you get approached?
I was the artist on some variant covers for the Energon Universe, so you may have seen me already on the Transformers and Duke variants. And at the time I was working, I've done with them, the editor asked me, do you want to draw a story about ninjas and tough redhead? And I said, yeah, why not? So here we are.
Okay. Well, who is, in the Energon universe, who is Shana O'Hara, a.k.a. Scarlett?
She's an incredibly capable, talented, smart, young woman who is not in the right job, who's like thought she was getting in the right job. She's in the military. She's trying to make the world a better place, do these things that she finds are so important and matter in the world. And she's just feeling hamstrung at every opportunity. She's also someone who has basically like her sister, a woman codenamed Jinx, who she's very close to. They even live together, who has gone missing years ago, and nobody in the military will talk to her about where she is or if they're trying to find her. So she's as she's feeling like the job is not working out, she's also having this lack of trust in it and this frustration that it doesn't really care about its operatives, and just genuine fear for her friend who she's to have all those skills and not be able to utilize them and know that someone is missing or dead or suffering or, and that you could maybe help, but nobody will let you. It has got to be an incredibly frustrating feeling. Shana wants people to put her in places where her gifts can matter, and that's just not happening.
So you mentioned your history of writing redheads, fiery redheads, and I am you made me a fan of Black Widow in the comics. Aww. I always watched her in the movies, but in the comics, I kind of bypassed it until Kelly Thompson picked up the pen and wrote Natasha. Could we expect Shana to have Natasha vibes in this series? Because I'm telling you now, if so, I'm going to have to send a letter to Robert and Sean and say, hey, we need more than a miniseries with this.
I mean, I think there are certainly ties. A lot of what, how do I answer this? I think that when I first approached Scarlett, there was a lot of Black Widow in it. They have a lot of overlap in the Venn diagram, right? They're spies, they're military, they're not, Scarlett's not an assassin, but she certainly could be. And they've got this frustration with the system they're inside. I think for Black Widow, that probably happens when she's in the US and in Russia. Systems aren't always fun to work within. But they're these incredibly capable, beautiful, interesting women. But I do think that part of what makes Black Widow really special was the merging of Elena Casagrande and I. And I think what makes Scarlett special and different than Black Widow is sort of the merging of Marco and I. Like, I approached it initially more like Black Widow, like more sort of slick and Mission Impossible or Bondy. But I do think when Marco and I started getting into it together, there was a looseness and sort of an energy and a frenzy to his stuff that I really appreciated, and which really spoke, I thought, to the more John Wick-ish vibes of the pitch that are like about it being not about revenge, but about it really being personal for her and her being sort of single-minded in her attempt at this task. And so I think thanks to Marco, we ended up with something that still has some Black Widow vibes to it, but is definitely its own thing, which I'm really excited about.
Oh, that's great. So, how do the two of you collaborate and schedule your time on the project, being in different parts of the globe?
Well, this is always disappointing for people, but we mostly communicate through the script. I mean, we'll be on group emails together sometimes, but mostly Marco and I talk to each other through submitting script and submitting pages and, seeing what each other is doing and responding to that in kind. You'd love to just chat all day with your collaborators, but like we're all really, really busy. Everyone's always late, everything's always in a hurry, and there's not a lot of time for chit chat. So I would say most of the communication is through the script and the pages. Do you feel like that, Marco?
Yeah, I agree. I would do these as an example. I learned a lot about the universe by Cal's script because she needed to get me into the universe with what she was writing, because would have taken too much time to actually get me into all the lore and info I should knew about G.I. Joe and the characters. So I think the communication started by the script and right now comes directly from our constant work on the sketches and the layouts and the script that was actually that's our way to talk.
So Marco, let me ask you this: if I can remember, your work on Frontiers meant you did your own colors, but
Yep.
now you're working with Lou Rich. How does that change your approach with putting panels together, since you're not really working with a palette?
How can I say? It's very it's been really strange for me because I used to plan from the pencil a lot of how the colors will be usually, since I'm used to color myself. So at the start, I tried to code all the panels for Lee, but as we were working on the first issue, and you can see it more in the next issue, I started like leaving Lee to do his magic on the colors and trust his palette to convey what I was trying to do. Because we're working very fast. I wouldn't have been able to color myself, and what's usually something that creator-owned books and working by yourself all the times can make is you don't really want to trust the other member of the team, of the working team, and I feel that that's something that happened at first, but I got over pretty easily looking at Lee's work.
Ooh.
That's good. I love Lee's stuff, and I'm really excited. I think he's brought a sort of, it's not, female isn't the right thing, but like he's brought a sort of sensitivity to the palette that I want and I think is appropriate for the kind of story we're telling. Like, it's like you don't want your character, even though they're operating in a very like male universe, you don't want them to feel like you've had to strip the femininity off of them to get them there. So even though Scarlett needs to feel like a badass and an action hero and a covert spy and all these cool things, she's still also a woman. And so I feel like there's a slight softness in Lee's palette that really gets that. And like he's got a very light touch on like how he approaches the flashbacks. I find flashbacks a lot of time colorists just default to like sepia tones and it gets really muddy and heavy. There's a real lightness to the way he approached it on Marco's art that almost feels like sort of watercolor, like a monochrome watercolor that's fun. So Lee's done a great job of sort of bringing a third dimension to the book, I think.
I was going to use the word subtle. It is very subtle. You could still see the action, but you don't need those bright, vivid colors.
Yeah, it's not like overly shiny or overly bright. It's a fairly flat palette, but it's not without dimension. It also is great for things like, when you've got a mostly white scene and you have like a bright slash of blood across that, like by doing everything a bit more subtle, I think some of those things pop really extra fun.
So in the Energon universe, especially in G.I. Joe and Transformers, we've had some great reveals, and that continues here with issue 1. And issue 1 is on bookshelves now, so if you're not picking it up, you need to pick it up, guys. But we see it here again with the reveal or the reintroduction of the clan that gave us Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes. How did you come about making that decision to reintroduce those guys so soon? And how long will a brother have to wait for Snake Eyes?
I cannot answer that last bit because I'm sure, Hasbro's certainly got plans for everyone's fave. But I think the Arashikaji of it all came from a really organic place, like perhaps because of Scarlett's close ties with Snake Eyes, which then also makes her have close ties with Storm Shadow and sort of all the other Arashikaji characters. She does feel like a little more a part of the Arashikaji stories. Like she's outsider to it, but she's a little closer, I think, than a lot of the other Joes. And so it made sense to me for her to come in. And because I knew we weren't going to be able to use Snake Eyes as like a co-lead or anything, because I knew he would have his own story that they were working on at some point, I was looking for other touch point characters, and the first one that I was most excited about using was Jinx, and then she fit perfectly with the Arashikaji stuff. So that allowed us to get into Storm Shadow and Hardmaster. It also allowed us to use Stalker for a small scene in a way that made even more sense. So it all really grounded and fit together in a nice way. And I think that was mostly me pulling from stuff I liked and was interested in for the pitch. But you've also got a really steady hand from the Skybound guys and the Hasbro people. Like they know those universes inside and out. And they, like Skybound wanted me. I asked for a few more characters, and they're like, let's keep it tighter than this because we really want to focus on these. And they were right. I think, the instinct is to load it up with cameos because we all love those moments so much, but you don't want to grow beyond that or you risk like losing focus of the story you're trying to tell. So this way, keeping it to the Arashikaji and around that and centered mostly in Japan for most of the miniseries allowed us to really keep our focus where it needed to be.
Now, again, not telling my age, but I don't remember Stalker having a history with the Arashikaji. Is that something new in the universe, or is that something you pulled?
It might be that it's so sometime it's I don't think it's in all continuities, but some continuities, and now ours because I said it, suggest he had some of his training with the Arashikaji. Blind Master, I think, was one of his masters at some point, and it's not uniformly across all the universes or anything. It's something that is sometimes used, and I put it in, and everybody liked it, so we left it.
Yay! So I asked Josh this same question, and I'm going to ask it to both of you as well. Being this is an IP under Hasbro, and you mentioned the partnership with Hasbro, do you find it different in handling and how you and in your freedom to tell a story in the Energon universe than you would have, say, with what you're doing with Birds of Prey or what you did with Black Widow? Do you find that even though it's a private IP, it's the owned IP, that you still have?
So adding a licensor is always tricky. The biggest problem it's created for me with Hasbro really there aren't any problems. I've had a really great working relationship with Hasbro through both IDW when I did Gem and through now with Skybound doing this. The biggest thing with Hasbro is just it's a little more time you need, because when you submit your script to your editor and when Marco submits art, like it all has to go through extra layers of process of approvals. So if you've got the right team, both your editors at Skybound in this case, and whoever is in charge on the Hasbro end of like approving stuff or reviewing it, if you have the right team and everyone is on the same page, that can go really well. I've had problems with it on other on other properties with the licensors where I don't know if the people weren't on the same page or what, but it can cause real problems. I've never had that with Hasbro. Hasbro was very open, and so was Skybound, obviously. There was a version of my pitch that deviated further. It changed Shana more than I think anyone felt comfortable with. I still think that's the slightly better pitch in a way, but I do agree that it's maybe not the slightly better pitch for a G.I. Joe property. I think it would have been too much change. I think this is a better middle ground where you're making changes, you're bringing the character into a modern lens, you're creating new relationships and connections and problems for them, but you're not sort of throwing the baby away with the bathwater, which maybe the original pitch was doing too much of. So I think if you can work with the right editors and licensor, you guys can come to an agreement. It doesn't always go that well though. We're lucky, I think. I can't speak to it from Marco's side because I'm a little bit protected from what he has to deal with there, so I don't know. But I do know that what I get to see looks great.
Yeah, I approach that licensed works usually like having a set pair of tools to work with, because working on your stuff, you usually have all the freedom to do whatever you like and with everything's at your hand. But when you have to work on something licensed, it's more like having to work with just one pencil, and that one you have to need to use, but you have to do the best with that, and makes you really get out of your safe place that you've built for yourself on all the other works you've done. And it's a really good way to challenge yourself to get better and to find your place in something that you at first feel like constricting yourself, but actually when you find a way to move around it, makes you grow as an author in general, not only as technically as an artist, but like for your profession. So I think it's being a very good collaboration with Skybound and Hasbro.
I mean, I think Marco and I are describing sort of the ideal way that can go. I don't want to suggest it always does go that way, and I want to give praise to Skybound and Hasbro for it going that well, because it is hard. It can be very difficult. But I also think Marco has hit on something that's really like, I'm too old and jaded to have held on to this attitude, but he's really got the right attitude there as far as like being successful in this business. Like, you know, when you get notes, they're often counter to what you want them to be. Like, you submitted the thing that you thought was good. You don't want notes on it, you know, but yes, sometimes those notes are right, or sometimes those notes are right enough that they can help you get to a better, different place. And like, I think all creatives, our knee-jerk reaction tends to be, ugh, you know, no, I did what I wanted. Why don't you like it? But you can sometimes find something better through those notes. And if your IP holder, if you're lucky and your IP holder and your editors are very good and really know and care about the underlying property and are committed to making quality stuff, those notes tend to be good that can lead you to a better place, as opposed to just getting in your way. So Marco really has the right attitude, I think, there.
And considering what we've seen already in the Energon universe with how so different these properties in the Energon universe are from, say, Real American Hero. I mean, no one expected Adele Burkhardt to get killed during the Duke run. I mean, it took them 32 years to do it in the regular series. So no one expected Bumblebee to get blasted away in issue number 1 of Transformers. So yeah. I'm pretty sure when you all went with these pitches and they've come back and we're actually seeing this stuff, that's a great partnership. So this is my last question for both of you. When it's all said and done and this final issue of Scarlett comes out, what do you want fans to remember about it?
I think I just want them to love Shana and be so excited of seeing where Scarlett's going next, and what will happen with this world. Without giving too much away, I think while Storm Shadow is a very complicated shades of gray character, he's certainly more of an adversary in this book. And so I hope people are excited about where that character is going to go next and where all of these characters are going to go next. I want people to be so excited that G.I. Joe is an actual becoming a thing in Shana's world, and that's a place that's going to take her in and give her purpose, I hope people are excited about all of that.
Yeah, I'll go with more. I think Kelly has said it best that I can do, but I hope readers will keep in mind all the blows that Scarlett took throughout the series and look at the woman she became at the end, because she survived everything. It's as we said also in other interviews, it's a suicidal mission. It's very a solo mission she's taking by herself, and
yeah, because we saw no job, and then he's gone.
Yeah, no, it really is. It's not, I talked about that I wanted to reach for a couple other characters, like Roadblock was on my list and stuff like that, but it really did need to be Scarlett on her own. It's about her. It's her mission. It's her point of view, and it's her entry into this world.
I am so excited. The title is Scarlett. Issue 1 is already on shelves. I will have a review up on the website this weekend. Kelly Thompson, Marco Ferrari, thank you all so much for joining me here on the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Theo.
Hey, you got a second? The Comic Book Spot is looking for comic book fans with something to say. If you're interested in writing reviews of your favorite comic books, or you want to contribute original content with articles like The Top 10 Forgotten Spider-Man Villains, or Why One More Day Was the Worst Thing to Ever Happen in Comics, or maybe Why Indie Comics Saved the Comic Book Industry, then we want to invite you to join our family as a writer. Just reach out and email us at writers@thecomicbookspot.com and let us know that you want to become one of our writers. It's that easy, and honestly, there's no reason not to. You get exclusive access to our staff Discord server, you get early access to comics, and you meet a lot of cool people. What are you waiting for? Just email us at writers@thecomicbookspot.com and let us know that you want to become one of our writers.
So again, I want to thank both Kelly and Marco for taking the time out of their busy schedule to speak with me on Scarlett and the series that is currently out on shelves. That's, again, as of this past Wednesday. I also want to thank the folks over at Skybound for making this happen. Again, those two are on a whirlwind tour on the day we recorded, and I'm happy that they were able to slot me in as well so that I can take part of it. It was a good time talking to them. I hope to have them on the show again in the future. But with that being said, let's talk a little bit about some of the comics that came out this week. And first and foremost, let's talk about Scarlett. That would be Scarlett #1, written by Kelly Thompson with art by Marco Ferrari. The first issue in this miniseries that is adding on to the Energon Universe, the partnership between Skybound and Hasbro Toys. And we see in this issue, pretty much as we discussed in the interview, how Scarlett is this military operative who is really torn with wanting to do right. Her superiors are giving her one mission and she's doing side missions in defiance of what she was there to do, considering she's supposed to be getting intel. And next thing you know, she's saving some hostages that were kidnapped. And that's where she finds that her best friend Jinx is still alive. And so if you are familiar with the lore and the canon of G.I. Joe, you know that they've been best friends as well as worst enemies, depending upon the universe. But in this one, she is Scarlett's best friend, and she sees that she's alive. And we kind of get their back history and how there are coded words and things and how they communicate between each other and no one else. And so this all leads to Scarlett returning home and being pretty much suspended for defying orders again. And that's where she gets home and she sees Stalker waiting on her. And if you follow what's going on in Duke, you see he plays a pivotal role in the overall formation that's gonna end up being what we know as G.I. Joe. So he is sending her on another mission outside the realms of what is known, and sends her to the clan Arashikaj, where she is to make an offer in order to get Jinx back. Stalker has a history with the clan as well. He sees Jinx as an important asset and, wants her back. And so he sends Scarlett to head out there to get Jinx back. And it's almost like a suicide mission, because this offer that Scarlett is supposed to make is her to basically trade Jinx for her. And we see in the end that doesn't go according to plan, as Storm Shadow takes her out. And that will eventually take us into issue 2. I'm actually going to be looking into that within the next week or so. I know that I already posted the story of the first look into issue 2 as well. So if you haven't seen that yet, head over to the site, take a look at those preview images, and you can kind of see where the story will pick up from when it comes out. But on the art side, again, I love Marco's pen work, but I love Lee Lou Ridge's art with regards to the colors as well. They're very subtle. You can still get the story without it being so overly vivid. So it's perfectly done. And I think what Kelly mentioned with regards to the subtleness, adding credence to the fact that this is a strong female story. Looking at Scarlett, it does that, and so I truly enjoy it. But again, that is Scarlett #1 from Kelly Thompson and Marco Ferrari over at Skybound Image. Next up, our second feature title of the week, Space Ghost #2, written by David Pepos with art by Jonathan Lau, colors by Andrew Dahlhaus over at Dynamite Entertainment. Our interview from earlier in the week. Again, this story picks up not long after Space Ghost saves Jan and Jace from Robocore and the attack on the family trying to get their hands on Blip in order to make some money off of them. But we see that they make their way to Space Ghost's outpost, what is known as Ghost Planet. It's a planet that was also attacked and destroyed. And we kind of get glimpses of that in the beginning of the story where we see Space Ghost without his mask. This is before he becomes who he is now. And he finds his family murdered and killed as this planet was attacked. So now he has Jan and Jason Blip with him, and as we talked about in the interview with David, he's not used to that. He's used to being the loner that he's always been, and now that these three are there, he's not coping quite well. But he can't focus on that for too long because he comes and finds out that Jace takes the ghost plane out, and as he does so, he comes under attack by the energy monster. So this now forces SG to go out and hang around the kids he doesn't want to be around in the first place. And what we find is the energy monster not only begins draining the energy from the ghost jet, it also begins draining power from Space Ghost's power bands as well. And so he and Jace find themselves having to team up in order to take the energy monster down. It's a really well crafted story that ends in Jan and Jace officially becoming sidekicks of Space Ghost. They get their mask and they get their jetpacks. So it was the funniest part of the story, seeing Jan and Jace and Blip putting on their mask as the story ends. But again, well crafted to bring the universe into what we know to be continuity, with Space Ghost having Jan and Jason Blip as his partners. So we will see how things go on, as the next part is Beware the Web of the Widow. And I can only imagine who that will be bringing into David Pepos' world of Space Ghost. So that is, wait, before I do that, let's talk a little bit about the art. Again, just as with issue 1, the art from Jonathan Lau, very good. I love the work that he does with the colors from Andrew Dahlhaus. And it's just really good. I would imagine, review copies aren't as vivid as actual digital copies that you may buy from Amazon or iBooks. But I would imagine if looking at this in a digital format or even on a printed page, that the colors are just so vivid. It really works. See, this is the type of colors you do not want in Scarlet, but it works perfectly here in Space Ghost, and I absolutely love it. But again, that is Space Ghost #2, written by David Pepos with art from Jonathan Lau over at Dynamite Entertainment. So let's get on over to Marvel, and 3 books on that side that I want to talk about real quick. Real quickly, Bloodhunters number 2, which is the anthology type series that they're doing for the event. 3 stories in each issue. I remember when looking at this last time, I was very disappointed, and I felt it was a little bit too comedic, considering what's going on in Bloodhunt. This one was much better. It was more darker in tone. You saw the seriousness of what's going on. The worst of the stories, and again, all 3 stories in this issue were better than the stories in issue 1. But the story that I liked the least was the one involving the Hulk. And it's probably because I haven't been following what's going on in Bruce's world these days as of late, other than the few issues he appeared in Sensational She-Hulk. But that one was probably the least liked for me. Again, it wasn't bad. It's just that compared to the other 2, I liked it less. My favorite was actually the one Once More Into the Darkness, which focused on Elsa Bloodstone and Dagger and White Widow. I am assuming that there's going to be another issue containing that story, considering how that story ended with Dagger becoming infected and turning into a vampire herself. That story was written by Erica Schultz with art from Bernard Chang. The second story, which was the story that had Kate Bishop, that one was written by Ann Nocenti with art by David Baldion. We Drink to Forget We Drink. I think the only reason why I didn't like this one more than the third story is because I am not familiar with the history of Dante Malik. I don't know if he's a new character. It looks like he's been around a while since Kate is familiar with him, but I'm not familiar with him. So I guess I will have to research to see who he is and where he is usually hanging out in the Marvel Universe. But again, issue number 2 of Bloodhunters was way better than issue 1, simply because it darkened the tone, made it seem more serious as we looked at the Bloodhunt event from the standpoint of this is actually hell on earth right now, and there wasn't that comedic tone that I just felt was too strong in issue 1. But that is Bloodhunters number 2, written by Ann Nocenti, Erica Schultz, and Kari Anderson, with art from Alex Lins, Bernard Chang, and David Baldion over at Marvel Comics. Staying at Marvel, we look at X-Men number 35, which is also being considered legacy for Uncanny X-Men number 700. It really gets me how Marvel does this with naming these titles and going legacy and blah blah blah. But this is commemorating the 700, quote unquote, the 700 issue of Uncanny X-Men. So with that, and this is 89 pages. So we have a host of writers on this one, with Al Ewing, Chris Claremont, Gail Simone, Jerry Dugan, who's been the main writer on X-Men, and then Jed McKay and Karen Gillan, with art by a score of guest artists. And what we see several aftermaths of the Fall of the House of X event. The first story, which focuses on the returning Krakoa, was really, really strong. And it was really, really good. Man, I have always known the character formerly known as Apocalypse to be just this rootless monster type character, in how rootless he can be. Oh boy, did they really, really, really kick it to another level in this issue. I mean, he just was blowing through the X-Men like it was nothing, and it was just insane just how strong they made him look. I really, 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 really enjoyed that story. I also appreciated the conversation between Magneto and Xavier, and how in the end it seemed like Eric, I will always call him Eric, I'm not familiar, and well, I'm not sold on the whole Max thing, but how Magneto more or less says that Charles was right in wanting peace for the mutants of the world. But it was astonishing that in all this time that Krakoa was gone, which, you know, again, with the event of Fall of X, or the Fall of the House of X, for those that were in the White Hot Room, including Krakoa, it was 15 years that they were in that realm that was beyond space and time. And as they returned to allow those who wanted to come back home to return home. But they were leaving again. They did not want to stay. They wanted to stay with Krakoa in the White Hot Room. And man, Apocalypse was not feeling that. I mean, the way he blew through Exodus and just beat him senseless, and then started going one by one, taking out other X-Men who stood in his way. And it was just bam. I mean, he blowed through them like it was nothing. And it was really strange in that it didn't take an act of violence to stop Apocalypse for just continuing taking out X-Men after X-Men. It took an act of peace. Jean and Emma connecting to him telepathically so that he could connect to all of the mutants that had returned from Genosha, who were dead and were resurrected with D5. And how in the end, you know, everything that he taught and everything he strove for wasn't needed anymore. His people were at peace. And it was just a great, great story. If I had one thing that I did not like with regards to the story was, again, this was an 89-page book. I understand that. So, you know, the notion of having multiple artists contribute is expected. It's understandable. But to have the number of artists that they needed to do this story was a little bit rough. I think the worst of the artists that were in that story, for me, was John Romita Jr., but I have not been a fan of his for a while. The rest of the artists that contributed to this story were pretty awesome. And again, I just loved how menacing they made Apocalypse look. And in the end, when he realizes he no longer is needed, it didn't take a punch. It didn't take a gunshot. It didn't take anything. It just took a small connection to all 15 million of the returned mutants for him to realize that they had achieved the peace he wanted for them. And that was just a really good story. Again, it was the longest story of the issue. It was almost 50 pages, actually over 50 pages of the 89. And then from there, we got stories that kind of leave us looking forward to what's to come in the X books. So we know that X-Men is coming back. We get a snippet of what's going to happen in Heirs of Apocalypse. We see that Charles isn't as trapped as he thought he was, because again, Charles does Charles things, and leaving little bitty back doors that allows him to still get away with stuff. And so we see what's to come in the world of X-Men as Charles makes his way from person to person with Jean, knowing that he is out telepathically and speaking to him, but he realizes that his people will be fine. I also enjoyed the story with Mystique and Rogue and Nightcrawler and Destiny as they continue to explore this new dynamic of Nightcrawler being... I'm gonna kill the cat. Thanos is celebrating his birthday, y'all, so he wants to share it with everyone. So if anyone wants to send gifts to him, please do so. You can send it to PayPal or through Patreon, but yeah, that's him. He's celebrating his birthday. But anyway, this dynamic of family between Nightcrawler and Rogue and Mystique and Destiny, I don't know how they are going to play on it. There's definitely a story there, especially considering the resentment that Kurt is having. That is really understandable considering all the folks that were involved. So it's not just his parents, but Charles, of course, is also involved in wiping everyone's memories. So that was also a good story in this issue. But that is X-Men 35 with a bunch of writers and a bunch of artists over at Marvel Comics. Then the last Marvel title I want to cover for this episode is The Ultimates #1, written by Dennis Camp with art by Juan Frigeri. This brings the team that we know as The Ultimates back into this new universe that's under the leadership, per se, of Jonathan Hickman. We see Tony go out and, attempt to grow their numbers by revealing the orbs of power that were stolen from Maker. And we see how some have succeeded and others have failed. The two that we get in this issue that we see complete the team is that of Wasp and Ant-Man, or in this sense, in this world, Giant Man, Hank Pym and Janet. So we see them take out Captain Britain, although we don't know if he is dead. But that was a good story. I am wondering if Jonathan Hickman's role is as in-depth as it was with the X-Books when that universe of Hoxpox came out, or if things are a little bit more hands-off. But it was still a good story. right now, Ultimate Spider-Man is still the best of all of the Ultimate books that are out there right now. But I am definitely going to be reading this one and keeping up with this one, as at some point we will be seeing the Ultimate Universe's version of She-Hulk make her appearance. So, of course, I am definitely going to be there for that. But again, that is The Ultimates #1, written by Dennis Camp with art by Juan Frigeri over at Marvel Comics. Moving on over to Boom Studios, we have Profane #1, written by Peter Milligan with art by Raul Fernandez, colors by Giada Marchisio. I hope I'm saying that correct. This is a crime noir story with a really huge twist that focuses on P.I. Will Profane, who is looking to solve his latest case. But he really doesn't know what it is, because he is blacking out. There's apparently magic within this, and it's just all over the place. It truly is a mystery. But again, the twist part really plays out in the end, where Will Profane finds out that he is a character in a book. In fact, he is the lead character in a list of books by a writer whose murder he's now trying to solve. And what we have at the end, when we get to the end of the title, is he finds this writer, the guy who's writing his story, and he's reading the pages that has been acted out by him already. But now that he's dead, we don't know what's next for Will Profane. He is a character in a story that has no ending. And that is quite a mystery for anyone to figure out, that not only are you not real, but you don't know what's next for you, because the person that controls it has been killed. You know, the only saving grace is this notebook of his that apparently has been stolen. But this was an awesome story. This probably could have been my book of the week if it wasn't for our next title that is the book of the week. But really good story. I really enjoyed it. The art was really good as well. Despite the fact that it wasn't in black and white, which you see a lot of noir stuff done, this was a really good story with really good art and really good colors, despite it being a noir story. But again, that is Profane #1, written by Peter Milligan, art by Raul Fernandez, over at Boom Studios. Lastly, my book of the week, it is The Boy Wonder, issue #2, written and drawn by Juniba, with colors by Chris O'Halloran over at DC Comics. So, I remember when I met and interviewed Juniba, and you can listen to that interview over at the Batman Universe. I'll post the link in the show notes. But when I interviewed Juniba and we talked about this world of Damian and his brothers who he would be interacting with, I had no clue what we were going to get. We saw in issue 1 the relationship with Damian and Dick. It's kind of similar to what you see in main continuity, how, their relationship is probably the strongest of the boys. But we see in issue 2, and issue 2 focuses on Damian and Jason, Oh man, this story is deep. It is so striking when you see how different Jason's journey has been and how Juniba depicts Jason visually. It just adds to how deep and how far Jason has fallen since his return from the dead. And there's not much interaction between he and Damien. It really comes towards the end. But Damien is telling his story. He knows what's been going on. And you finally see them interact more as the story comes to an end. But when you see Jason's story, and it crushes you just how devastating it is. But you see that there is care and love for Jason by Damien as he, goes to him towards the end of the issue and tells him, hey, you need to get with Dick. He can help you. We can help you. But man, this on a 5-star level, this is probably, if this isn't a 5 for me, it's really damn close to being one. The art is just so dramatic. Again, in how Juniba depicts Red Hood, and just wow, that's all I can say about it. It was just that good. But again, my book of the week, The Boy Wonder, number 2, written and drawn by Juniba over at DC Comics. So that is going to do it for this episode of the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. Next week, we're going to be doing some more comic book reviews. First, we're going to be looking at Transformers number 9 from over at Skybound Image. We're going to be looking at Batman and Robin number 10 from DC. We're going to look at Blood Hunt number 3, the 3rd issue of the event from Marvel Comics. We're going to be looking at the 3rd issue of Geiger, volume 2, that's from Jeff Johns with art by Gary Frank. I might look at Thundercats number 5 from Declan Shalvey. I'm not sure if I'm hoping I enjoy it. I really do. I've been having mixed reactions with Thundercats. We're also going to look at Outsiders number 8 from Jackson Lansing and Colin Kelly over at DC. That's a Jenny Hex and Kate Kane story, so I'm going to take a look at that. Then Mad Cave's Dick Tracy number 2 is supposed to be out next week, so I'm planning on taking a look at that from writers Michael Moresi and Alex Segura, again over at Mad Cave. Then we have the return of Elseworlds to DC with Batman, Gotham by Gaslight, the Kryptonian Age. If you've been looking at some of the current issues from DC, especially in the Bat books, you've seen that they've had a preview of what's going to be going on in that story. And then we're going to look at High on Life from Titan. That's written by Alec Robbins with art by Kit Wallace. That's really look like a sci-fi type story. So we'll take a look at that. And then finally, we're also going to look at the final issue of Little Black Book over at AWA from writer Jeff McKenzie with art by Felipe Cunha. But again, that is going to do it for this week's episode. I truly want to again thank Kelly Thompson and Marco Ferrari for joining me for this episode, and again thanking the folks over at Skybound for setting everything up. I really enjoy the partnership that we've developed with those guys at Skybound. Every time I go to a con and they're there, they're more than willing to talk and just have conversations about what they're planning, where they're going, and just stories in general. I really enjoy spending time and talking comics with those folks. They really know what they're doing over there at Skybound as they create these great comics and develop all of these wonderful partnerships to bring us not just comics, but also other things that they are going to be coming out with soon. So thank you guys over at Skybound. And again, thanks to Kelly and Marco for joining me for this episode. That is going to do it for this episode of the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. I'd like to thank you all for your continued support of the program. The Comic Bin Podcast, as well as the Comic Book Spot, are a part of the Comic Book Source family of sites and media. You can follow the podcast on Twitter X at comic_bin, or my personal account at BatmanFan_4life. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads. We're all over social media. You can also follow our sister site over at thebatmanuniverse.net for all of your news and reviews in the world of Batman. Tune in next time as we give you more in the world of comic books. Again, we truly appreciate your support. But until we meet again next time, keep reading those comics.